You got to see this. You're going to find out what NATO is, and you're also going to hear President Trump giving a speech at NATO and saying, listen, we want everybody to pay their fair share. Check it out. Well, we had the most exciting first international trip of President Donald Trump around many different countries. As a matter of fact, here is a highlight reel of what a blessed trip it was. Take a look.
From Saudi Arabia to Israel to NATO to the G7, we made extraordinary gains on this historic trip to advance the security and prosperity of the United States, our friends, and our allies. We paved the way for a new era of cooperation among the nations of the world to defeat the common enemy of terrorism and provide our children with a much more hopeful future. I was deeply encouraged to hear from the leaders of many Muslim and Arab nations that they are ready to take on a greater role in combating terrorism and providing young Muslims in their region with a future of safety and a future of opportunity. I went to Jerusalem, where I reaffirmed our unbreakable bond with the State of Israel. I was awed by the majesty and beauty of the Holy Land and the faith and reverence of the devoted people who live there. All children from all faiths deserve a future of hope and peace. In Rome, I was inspired by the beauty and even more inspired by meeting with Pope Francis. Then I traveled to 2 summits. First at a NATO summit in Brussels, where we agreed to improve the burden sharing among members of our alliance and to further confront the shared threat of terrorism. Next, I attended the G7. I laid out my vision for economic growth and fair trade and support of good-paying jobs, and I called for much greater security and cooperation on matters of both terrorism, immigration, migration, to protect our citizens. We concluded a truly historic week for our country. We traveled the world to strengthen long-standing alliances and to form a new partnership among nations devoted to the task of eradicating the terrorism that plagues our planet. And I am now more hopeful than ever in the possibility that nations of many faiths, many religions, and from many regions can join together in a common cause.
Can we ask for a better leader? That exactly what he said he's going to do. He went into the world, into the nations, and said, this is the American taxpayer, this is what they want, and he began to set agenda for safety and security and investing in NATO. It was a major trip. We're going to talk more about that today, but we need to pray for our president and pray protection over his cabinet and the government, that God's going to begin to continue to go in this direction, because this is the mercies of God. As a matter of fact, that President Trump even got a chance to meet with the Prime Minister of Japan, Prime Minister Abe. Matter of fact, take a look there.
Thank you very much. It's great to have Prime Minister Abe, a friend of mine and somebody we've just developed a great relationship. And it's wonderful to have you here. We'll be discussing many things, including, of course, North Korea, which is very much on our minds. We'll be discussing terrorism, but I think we will really be, in particular, focused on the North Korea problem. It's a big problem, it's a world problem, and it will be solved. At some point, it will be solved. You can bet on that. And I just want to thank you very much, Prime Minister.
ありがとうございます。2人を越して、大統領とドナルドとお目にかかれて嬉しく思います。
Donald, it's a great pleasure for me to see you again.
ただ一つ残念なことは、今回はゴルフができないのです。
There's one unfortunate thing that I have to confess. This time around, we won't be able to play golf together.
また、NATO そして中東訪問の大成功で祝意を表したいと思います。世界の安全保障について強くコミットしていく姿勢を示しておられますことに対して評価したいと思います。
And also at the outset, I'd like to congratulate you on your successful visit to the Middle East region, as well as your participation in the NATO summit. And through your visit, I understand that you have demonstrated robust commitment to ensuring global security, and I highly value your commitment.
北朝鮮の問題はもちろんのこと、世界のさまざまな課題について、共にしっかりと連携していくことを確認する首脳会談としたいと思います。
Of course, as you mentioned, we are going to talk about North Korean issues, but also we are going to cover other various challenges of the international community. And on this occasion, I would like to reconfirm our close partnership as well as collaboration in addressing those of the challenges.
Well, I want to say that it is reconfirmed. It is a close partnership and collaboration and friendship. We've developed a great friendship, and I look forward to being with you, spending some time with you, and I'll be seeing you for today, and I'll be seeing you, I'm sure, many times over the years to come, and I look forward to that. Thank you.
I don't know if you know this or not, but Japan's military is the U.S. military. When they, during World War II, remember the historical, not the present day Japanese folks, but their forefathers attacked America, Pearl Harbor. And one of the agreements they had to sign at that time was you cannot have your own military, but we would protect them. So you're looking at America's leader and Japan's leader coming together, working out how that protection is going to be. And he is reportedly getting really close to President Trump, and they're standing together. That's powerful to see that take place, and we're just grateful for that taking place. When we get back from this break, we're going to talk about NATO. A lot of us don't understand NATO, but it's very important. You, the taxpayer, all of us, we've been funding this thing called NATO, and our president's saying, listen, it's about defending other countries. You need to pay your fair share. American taxpayers should not have to pay for the defense of your country. But we have been doing that. And so the president takes a serious stand in front of all these countries, and guess what? We have that speech for you right here on VFN TV. Join us after the break. President Trump just went and had the speech to NATO.
Yes.
And with NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that's where all the countries that participate are supposed to pay 2% of their gross domestic product.
Yes, GDP, right?
Yeah, to be able to help support the military. And that way we're there for each other. 28, I think. And
put some money in the kitty for defense,
right?
right?
Well, that's what's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
And so if something happens to one of the NATO countries, then if it happens to one, it happens to all. But the problem is when the bill showed up, the bill happened to one, but it didn't happen to all.
That's right.
But before we go there, because President Trump said exactly what he said he would do, he confronted the countries.
Yes.
But let's find out a little bit what NATO's about first. Take a look.
What is NATO, and why are the world's most powerful leaders suddenly so worried about it? Well, NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a political and military alliance between North America and Europe that was born out of World War II and signed into effect in 1949. Its main aim back then, to push back against any future aggression from the Soviet Union.
The developments of the North Atlantic Pact may have been reflected in the recent changes in the Soviet High Command.
This became particularly important in 1955 when the Soviet Union and 7 other European countries signed the Warsaw Pact. Communism was spreading across Eastern and Central Europe, and this pact promised military support for Soviet satellite states. There were 12 original NATO member countries. Today, there are 28. 7 of those are former Warsaw Pact countries. Each member of NATO has an equal say in discussions and decisions. One of the most important principles of the NATO treaty is Article 5. It states that an attack on one country is in theory an attack against all members. In theory, all troops and equipment in each nation is available for NATO to use. That means there are 3.6 million active personnel and another 3.7 million in reserve. So if it really came down to it, 7.3 million NATO forces could be mobilized. But Article 5 has been invoked only once in its nearly 70-year history, the day after 9/11. It led to NATO action in Afghanistan. Collectively, NATO member states account for most of the globe's military spending, just under $1 trillion. In 2006, all 28 member states agreed to spend 2% of their GDP for the alliance's defense spending. But in fact, in reality, that target is rarely met. In 2015, the median spend was just 1.18%. The United States spent a whopping 3.7%. That means that America accounted for some 70% of the alliance's total defense spending, and it is only one of 5 countries to spend more than 2%. NATO admits the funding imbalance has been an issue since the start of the alliance, and that it does cause friction.
That's why this is so important for us to understand this before we understand the president's going to do. He's speaking right there at NATO. They just built it. Obviously, they built it on the American dollar and the British dollar. There's only a handful of countries that are paying their 2%. And I know Great Britain is, and a couple other ones are, but most of them are not. And he's saying, he's right in front of the piece of the Berlin Walls there and a piece of the 9/11. The 9/11 Museum dedicated that piece of the building that fell down, the towers. And he's standing in the presence of them. So when you hear this authoritative speech where he's being nice, but he's saying, nobody told me how much this building costs. He's saying, because you paid for it. The taxpayer paid for it. American taxpayer.
70% of the bill.
70%. So if something happens in the world with one of these 28 countries, you, the taxpayer, would pay for that. And he's saying, listen, everybody pay your 2%, and then we can do this. And that's the bare minimum. So let's join President Trump at the NATO speech as he's addressing as the primary giver of finances and support and military support for these countries. Take a look.
Thank you very much, Secretary General Stoltenberg, Chancellor Merkel. Thank you very much. Other heads of state and government, I'm honored to be here with members of an alliance that has promoted safety and peace across the world. Prime Minister May, all of the nations here today grieve with you and stand with you. I would like to ask that we now observe a moment of silence for the victims and families of the savage attack which took place in Manchester. Thank you. Terrible thing. This ceremony is a day for both remembrance and resolve. We remember and mourn those nearly 3,000 innocent people who were brutally murdered by terrorists on September 11th, 2001. Our NATO allies responded swiftly and decisively, invoking for the first time in its history the Article 5 collective defense commitments. The recent attack on Manchester in the United Kingdom demonstrates the depths of the evil we face with terrorism. Innocent little girls and so many others were horribly murdered and badly injured while attending a concert. Beautiful lives with so much great potential, torn from their families forever and ever. It was a barbaric and vicious attack upon our civilization. All people who cherish life must unite in finding, exposing, and removing these killers and extremists. And yes, losers. They are losers. Wherever they exist in our societies, we must drive them out and never, ever let them back in. This call for driving out terrorism is a message I took to a historic gathering of Arab and Muslim leaders across the region, hosted by Saudi Arabia. There I spent much time with King Solomon, a wise man who wants to see things get much better rapidly. The leaders of the Middle East have agreed at this unprecedented meeting to stop funding the radical ideology that leads to this horrible terrorism all over the globe. My travels and meetings have given me renewed hope that nations of many faiths can unite to defeat terrorism, a common threat to all of humanity. Terrorism must be stopped in its tracks or the horror you saw in Manchester and so many other places will continue forever. You have thousands and thousands of people pouring into our various countries and spreading throughout. And in many cases, we have no idea who they are. We must be tough, we must be strong, and we must be vigilant. The NATO of the future must include a great focus on terrorism and immigration, as well as threats from Russia and on NATO's eastern and southern borders. These grave security concerns are the same reason that I have been very, very direct with Secretary Stoltenberg and members of the alliance in saying that NATO members must finally contribute their fair share and meet their financial obligations. But 23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States. And many of these nations owe massive amounts of money from past years and not paying in those past years. Over the last 8 years, the United States spent more on defense than all other NATO countries combined. If all NATO members had spent just 2% of their GDP on defense last year, we would have had another $119 billion for our collective defense and for the financing of additional NATO reserves. We should recognize that with these chronic underpayments and growing threats, even 2% of GDP is insufficient to close the gaps in modernizing, readiness, and the size of forces. We have to make up for the many years lost. 2% is the bare minimum for confronting today's very real and very vicious threats. If NATO countries made their full and complete contributions, then NATO would be even stronger than it is today, especially from the threat of terrorism. I want to extend my appreciation to the 9/11 Memorial and Museum in New York for contributing this remnant of the North Tower, as well as to Chancellor Merkel and the German people for donating this portion of the Berlin Wall. It is truly fitting that these two artifacts now reside here so close together at the new NATO headquarters. And I never asked once what the new NATO headquarters cost. I refuse to do that. But it is beautiful. Each one marks a pivotal event in the history of this alliance and in the eternal battle between good and evil. On one side, a testament to the triumph of our ideals over a totalitarian communist ideology bent on the oppression of millions and millions of people. On the other, a painful reminder of the barbaric evil that still exists in the world and that we must confront and defeat together as a group, as a world. This twisted mass of metal reminds us not only of what we have lost, but also what forever endures, the courage of our people, the strength of our resolve, and the commitments that bind us together as one. We will never forget the lives that were lost. We will never forsake the friends who stood by our side. And we will never waver in our determination to defeat terrorism and to achieve lasting security, prosperity, and peace. Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
What a powerful speech. Guess what? If you're an American, you paid 70% of that
That's
building.
right. That's right.
Whatever the price was. And it's so wonderful because he said he was going to make sure that people paid their fair share.
Yeah.
And that each of those countries, I saw Greece laughing, I saw Greece's prime minister laughing, I saw France kind of, it's like, they need to pay their fair share.
Send the money.
Send the money. And we're going to go on a French fry strike.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching VFN TV. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up. Also, if you want to see more videos like this, subscribe. You know, a lot of people want to abide with the Lord, but they just don't have a plan to do it. You can request that plan today at iabide.org. Don't forget you can join us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Download our app and sign up for our newsletter, The Torch, at vfntv.com.